Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. This week, I'm looking back over the past year and bringing you the top stories we've covered on Saving America. Donald Trump came out recently and very explicitly said, we're going to wage the largest deportation program in history. The logistics of doing it, on the other hand, I think would be very difficult. And speaking as a taxpayer and a person who's actually paying attention, I'd like to know what the logistics of that are. I think that the answer is that it has a certain political appeal to a certain group of people, but the cliche is the devil is in the details, and I think the details will be very difficult. The first thing you'd have to do is you'd have to dramatically increase the number of immigration judges, people that are hearing, because virtually all of these people are claiming that they're being politically prosecuted in their own, or persecuted rather, in their own countries, and therefore they need to get asylum in the United States. I expect that very few of those people will be able to substantiate it, but frankly, are they even physically going to show up at these court dates? So the first thing is, I guess you could arrest people if they have a court date and they don't show up, but do we even know where these people are? I think the gradual situation will be what I've heard recently is some of the people have found out that this is not nearly the party that they expected it to be. And many of these people are being cared for by what we call NGOs, non-governmental organizations like Catholic Charities and stuff. And these organizations have limited resources. My understanding is they are getting money from the federal government to provide basic services. But at some point, these people are going to want to have a stable home life, have a place to live, not live in a tent. And I think that they may have a self-realization about that. I think the key element here, and I'm not Machiavelli, I'm not a mean person, but I do think that what we're looking at here is that if we refuse to provide free food, free medical care, free education for these people who are not here legally, that we then have created a different dilemma is, do these people have even the resources to return to their country? Or are we going to be booking the old 747s and loading them up with people and depositing them in Venezuela, El Salvador, Guatemala, and so forth? I mean, what's the plan if you have all of these people? I don't think we're going to be flying them back to China. We've been told that there's been a significant increase in the number of immigrants from China who've been coming through the southern border, and a number of people coming from the Middle East and different parts of Africa. Just the logistics and the cost of doing that could be significant. So yes, I think it has a political appeal, but I think it would also be very expensive. But in the long run, it would be less expensive to ship people out of the country than it would be to provide all of these social services. None of these people have the right to vote, although there have been discussions in New York and other, perhaps I guess you'd say blue-controlled areas of allowing people to vote just because they're physically in an area. They've also been giving away driver's licenses, which often are used to register people to vote at the same time. And so there's no telling how many people who are here illegally already have a voter registration card, even though it would be illegal to use that voter registration card for federal elections and for elections in most cases. So I guess when you have people show up for things like that, you could say, well, hey, we're glad to see you show up here. We're going to send you to the next bus station and ship you out of here. The other part of this is one of the parallel situations which has happened in the last 5 weeks, obviously, is the situation in Israel with the sad circumstances of October 7th. And a number of conservative politicians have said one of the ways that we can correct the surprising pro-Hamas demonstrations is to round up people who are here illegally supporting Hamas, who we must assume are not friends of the United States, but they're physically here in the United States, and also students on student visas that if they are actively campaigning, you might say, in favor of terrorists, that is a separate category of people who might suddenly find their student visas withdrawn and being escorted to the nearest airport. So that's something that's relatively new. I don't know that Trump was addressing that issue at all, but I can tell you that Ron DeSantis has, as of today, has promised state support to Jewish facilities and Jewish schools across Florida to protect those schools in the case that it's needed. Though I haven't heard much about protests in Florida. I assume there's some down there, but of course, most of the protests have been concentrated in what we call blue blue areas like New York City, Chicago, cities that traditionally have a different political view. And I still personally, I don't care what your political party is, I still don't really understand why anyone in the United States would want to support Hamas. But then again, I don't understand why Tlaib and Pressler and AOC and some of these people were ever elected to Congress. So maybe I'm missing some beats there.
Recently, there was an important ruling in the Alex Jones bankruptcy case. Here's a quick summary. Mr. Jones built a big following for a show called InfoWars. He has claimed that numerous events were actually media hoaxes. So he's called a conspiracy theorist. Among the media hoaxes that he's claiming are 9/11, and in particular, the sad massacre of 20 school children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut in 2012. A news report states, victims' families who sued Jones for defamation said they were subjected to years of torment, threats, and abuse by people who believed the lies told in a show. One father said conspiracy theorists urinated on his 7-year-old son's grave and threatened to dig up the coffin. So this is certainly not a trivial issue in anybody's book. The families filed lawsuits in Connecticut and Texas against Jones. Jones eventually acknowledged that Sandy Hook was real, but far too late. Juries awarded $1.5 billion in Connecticut and another $49 million in Texas. Jones has, of course, filed for bankruptcy. A recent issue was whether the InfoWars company should be liquidated or kept intact in the personal estate of Jones. A federal judge just ruled that InfoWars would be part of his estate and not liquidated at this time. Since Jones is in Texas, he has the protection of something called the Texas Homestead Act. That protects your home, the car you used to drive to work, and basic furniture and things like that. So his home is not personally involved in bankruptcy. Everything else that he owns, that's not what we call the exempt, is fair game in the bankruptcy in order to resolve these huge judgments. Estimates are between 5 and 10 million might be recovered by the litigants, again, against verdicts totaling over $1.5 billion. Now, Jones has not backed off entirely, claiming the lawsuits are a mission to silence him. He is still broadcasting via InfoWars, which is now in the hands of bankruptcy trustees. It is likely that he will be asked to abandon any interest in the company, and I think he's already done that. A special issue here is why the First Amendment did not protect Jones. The quick answer is that if someone says something false that causes harm to someone else, that person can be responsible for defamation. The hard part is proving damages. Obviously, these juries accepted the description of damages expressed by the families of the victims of the Sandy Hook massacre. Kechi Okwuchi is an amazing person who's had an amazing life in such a short period of time. One of only 2 survivors out of 109 passengers in a plane crash in her native Nigeria when she was a child. She has survived numerous surgeries and blossomed into the fascinating person that she is today. In my position at the Cameron School of Business at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, I've had the good fortune to know her as an outstanding student. Of course, she also disappeared from our student ranks during her studies since she was a finalist on the first season of America's Got Talent. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Among so much more to say about her, she is the author of a new book, More Than My Scars. We welcome Kechi for her first appearance on Saving America.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on Saving America. Dr. Schein, it's always good to see you. I'll be seeing more of you apparently this fall semester, but
Right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's just a delight to see you again because I haven't seen you in a while, and to get a chance to have you interviewed on Saving America. So right up front, at what point did you realize you could sing, and how did you get to the point of being on television?
So honestly, I've always loved singing growing up as a child, but my voice was nothing like it is now before the accident. My voice actually changed significantly after the accidents. We don't really know why. Medically, it's hard to say, but it was just one of those things where my mom and I and my family, everyone was just like, we'll just take this as one good thing that came out of this horrible tragedy, and just kind of ran with it. And it was just this hobby, it's always been a loved hobby. After the accident, it became even more of one. And music started to become this escape for me and healed parts of me that like surgery and physical, training and stuff could not heal. So it wasn't really ever going to be anything more than a hobby until I joined my church worship team. And then a year after that, America's Got Talent kind of came into my life through one of my best friends who signed me up for the show without telling me. And that's basically how I ended up on the show. And now I'm using my voice for many more things other than, just singing to myself and my family. So yeah, that's pretty much the history of my singing.
And I know it's an audition system. Were you auditioned here in Houston or someplace else?
So they do have that. The first level of auditions is usually, rather the first stage is usually like in-person open house auditions, but I didn't make it to any of those. Again, I was not interested in being on a show like that because I didn't feel like my voice was anything. I felt like I had a good voice. It was nice, but I didn't think it was anything that I would compete with. Like I felt like there were too many people out there who had voices just as good. So I didn't feel like I stood a chance. So I would never have gone to a physical audition myself. And so the time for that passed. And so my best friend, she signed me up through the online audition where you fill out a form and attach a video and like talk about yourself a little bit. She did everything and kind of sent it to them in that way. So it wasn't a physical audition. It was like an online kind of thing, application thing.
So sometimes it helps to have a friend pushing you from behind a little bit.
Yeah, without her push, I definitely would not be here today. That's for sure. So
really
yeah,
fascinating. And okay, we're just friends here. Tell us about Simon Cowell.
Simon. I mean, obviously, we know he has a reputation. He's this very frank, just a blunt man who just speaks his mind and says what he feels, whether it hurts your feelings or not. He'll tell you, the truth, about your talent, what he thinks about your talent anyway. And so, I went in there expecting to meet that Simon, because I try to prepare myself for that Simon, but I never got that Simon personally. I got a very nice, encouraging, sweet Simon that was extremely supportive of me. And I felt like when he saw me, he just took a liking to me and wanted to kind of root for me. And I think that was just like the vibe that I got from him. I'm not saying he wasn't his usual self on the show to other people, but luckily that energy was never directed at me. And I have to say that was extremely relieving because having someone like him in your corner is extremely validating and definitely helps you kind of feel a little more confident in what you have to bring to the table. So yeah, that's my story on Simon. I got the nice Simon for sure, but like I saw that not everyone got that Simon. So I was just happy, I wasn't the one who got the, the other version of him. So but yeah, that version of him is still out there, very alive and well and kicking. So
super. Well, to ask her question number 3, and we usually ask 3, we're going to ask you 4 today.
okay.
I am a big fan of working to control and reduce bullying in the workplace and in school. And I read that you are also an advocate for prevention of bullying. Tell us a little bit about your efforts in that area.
So bullying prevention is something that resonates very deeply with me, not because of what I experienced with bullying, but because of what my little sister experienced when we first moved to America. She had a very hard time adjusting and adapting, and the people around her did not make it easy for her. And I had to witness that, and put out a lot of fires along with my parents and just try to help her not to internalize any of the stuff that she was hearing about herself or how she was being treated. And thank God, what we try to teach her stuck rather than what the bullies did to her, because she blossomed into a very confident and self-assured young lady and has been that way ever since. But that experience that I had observing and protecting her during that time when things were really rough for her made me realize that I would want to be a part of something that would help prevent other kids from going through something like that as much as possible anyway. And then there's also the layer of there's layer added to my situation where I didn't experience bullying as a burn survivor, particularly, like specifically, but I was aware that a lot of burn survivors do go through bullying simply because of how different that they look. And so those two things kind of came together and made me have this drive to use whatever platform I end up ever having to, at least in some way, use it in some way to promote bullying prevention. So how do I do this? I work with a bunch of different organizations. One of the most prominent ones would be one called Be Strong. They are a student-led bullying prevention organization. And I think that's what stuck to me the most, which is why I work with them the most. I love the fact that they're not student run, but student led. So they have a lot of events and they have a lot of platforms that they allow their students, like their participants who are their members who are students, to kind of take charge of speaking out against bullying and talking about prevention of bullying. So they are using the demographic that goes through that the most, to speak out against that, speak out against bullying. And I think that's a very effective way to do it because kids are more likely to listen to each other, so that's why I work with them the most. And so what we try to do, and what I try to do, however I can, is to kind of teach 3 very important things. Number 1 is self-love. I think that everything stems from how you feel about yourself. In other words, the more you accept yourself, the more you accept your flaws, everything about you, good and bad, it makes it harder for someone else to make you feel bad about those things. So this is something I can speak about from experience. I know that being the way that I am has a lot to do with me being authentic and presenting that authentic self to the world as much as possible. And I feel like people need to learn more about how to do that as early as possible because it helps you combat bullying, because no one can make you feel bad about yourself if you've accepted yourself. So that's the first step to me. And I try to show that in my social media, in everything that I put out there on the internet. Second thing is cyberbullying, another thing I experienced on AGT. And I try to teach people, how to just deal with that, which is, at least for me, was either ignore or block. And then if it gets too bad, report, but never engage. Engaging is the last thing you want to do because it gives these people's ego the attention that they do not deserve. So that's another thing that I try to teach. And then the last one is accepting your flaws. I think that a lot of people have a lot of difficulty in doing that. And that's why bullies latch on and use that thing you feel bad about to make you feel bad. But when you accept that thing, a lot of times those things that make you unique can become your superpower. And for me, that's what my burns have done. They've given me this avenue to kind of this uniqueness that allows me to kind of, I draw strength from it, and it allows me to put out this message that I put out into the world. So, you know, I try to teach people that their unique thing, the thing that makes them different, can end up actually being their superpower in this life and can give birth to their purpose. So I think these are the ways really I try to do what I can to prevent bullying and to teach people about it. And also not to be a bystander if you see it happening, learn how to speak out, because a lot of times it makes it worse when you just keep quiet and walk away when someone is going through something. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, I think that's really what I try to do.
Well, fantastic. Yeah, I attended Catholic school, kindergarten through eighth grade, and the nuns were not very sensitive to the issue of bullying. I was bullied a lot from like second grade to fifth, sixth grade. And what helped me was to really focus on my academics, is to ignore the bullying. And I became an exceptional student, and I moved into an entirely different social group. And frankly, the rest of my academic career, I hung out with the smart kids, and it helped a lot. But
yeah.
really going in that, I mean, even many years later for me, it was a very difficult time in my life. So I certainly can relate to it. And also there's some growing concern that this may be feeding some of the mass violence that we're experiencing in America.
That's very true.
That many of the people who are the perpetrators have been bullied. And and so if you can all be nicer and focus on, if you see something, do something about it. Don't just watch people.
Don't be a bystander. Yeah.
So very, very cool. Kechi, I added a fourth question for you because there's so much to do. Tell the audience a little bit about your new book, More Than My Scars.
So More Than My Scars is a book that I wrote last year. And essentially, this book is pretty much my life story so far, but in much more detail than I've ever discussed in like out loud. And it focuses mainly on the parts of my life after the accident where I learned the most important lessons that helped me kind of become the person I am today. And most of those lessons were learned while I was in South Africa, which is where I was first treated before I moved to America. Those first 7 months after the accident were the most important, most significant moments in my life, not only because that was where my life was literally hanging in the balance, and we weren't sure if I would make it or not, but because during that time, I learned a lot of like important like theories, and I gained a lot of new perspectives that basically formed my foundation and helped me kind of make sense of certain things like identity and faith, and how to kind of overcome and deal with tragedy, and what place to put my injuries and my scars, what place to put them, what importance level to give them in my life with respect to the rest of society, because eventually I would have to leave the hospital and face a world that is extremely judgmental and does not treat different very nicely. So I would have to decide what, my scars would mean to me when going back out there. And so I think during those 7 months, I learned the most important lessons, and I try to that's what I try to share in the book, in the hopes that at least one person reading it would feel like maybe they gained something from it. But ultimately, I want people who've gone through trauma to feel seen. I want people who've gone through anything that has made them kind of stagnate, I guess, in their growth, to feel seen. And it doesn't have to be a physical, obvious trauma. We all have invisible scars, invisible trauma that are just as valid. And I wanted to validate all those kinds of trauma to anyone who reads, and to let them know that they are seen and their feelings are valid, and that there are ways to get over this kind of trauma. There is life to look forward to after trauma. And I wanted my life to be an example of that. So that's why I wrote the book, and shared all the nitty-gritty stuff about my story, not just the nice sounding things like, how she grew, she's confident, she's this, she's that, but like the difficult stuff that I had to overcome to become this person today, So I think we can all relate to that anyway, even if we kind of all relate to a plane crash, but that's what I wanted to share. And so far, I think the response has been extremely heartfelt and very relieving. Makes me feel like I did the right thing by writing it. So yeah, that's what my book is about.
Outstanding. How can our audience get more information about you?
So you can find me on pretty much any social media platform. I am on Instagram, I am on Facebook, Twitter, I'm on TikTok, I'm on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, Kechi, and you will find me like that. Just type in Kechi or Kechi Official. I also have a website, kechiofficial.com, where everything I just talked about, where it's all there, like all my social media platforms. So you can literally just go to my website and find everything else. And then that's where you can find me, and information about my book as well and my music. Yeah, it's all there.
Fantastic. The latest on the January 6th prosecutions. Virtually all Americans are aware of the riot that took place on January 5th, 2021 in the Capitol. The stated purpose was to protest the election outcome, making Joe Biden the president over incumbent Donald Trump. That was only part of the story. Subsequent to that, more than 1,200 people have been charged. Of that number, more than 460 were in prison for their role in the Capitol attack. At least 718 guilty pleas have resulted, many of those with jail time. Then the U.S. Supreme Court ruled near the end of the 23-24 term that the charge of obstructing an official proceeding did not apply to the January 6th protests. The actual case involves a Pennsylvania law enforcement official. In a 6-3 vote, SCOTUS ruled that the law applied only to evidence tampering in official proceedings. This was the main charge against most of the January 6 protesters, so many pending prosecutions will need to be reviewed or dropped. More important, those that pled guilty without the benefit of this opinion may move to withdraw their pleas, which would clear their criminal record. So the question is, how did the FBI and other federal law enforcement round up all of these potential defendants? Well, there was not an organized sign-in at the Capitol that day where people signed their name and said what state they were from or whatever. So how'd they find them? Well, it turns out they used something called geofencing. That may now be falling apart due to recent ruling of the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The ruling struck down geofencing warrants on the basis that they were an illegal dragnet. Warrants are supposed to be specific under the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. These warrants were too broad, according to the Fifth Circuit, and violated the defendant's rights to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. This could impact at least 300 of those charged in the January 6th matter. For those who are interested, Judge Ho's concurring opinion is a powerful endorsement of that decision and explanation. While this may be brought up to SCOTUS next, it will be interesting to see where this goes. I think the current SCOTUS justices will agree with Judge Ho. So the well-deserved A grade is to Governor Abbott. He doesn't get a lot of positives these days, but Governor Abbott and the Texas legislature, both parties, for a new bipartisan bill. It's House Bill 393, effective this month, September 2023. Makes a drunk driver responsible for child support for any children under 18 if the drunk driver kills a parent, not both parents, just a parent. The actual amount of child support will be determined by judge based on the overall finances of the child, such as if the other parent is still alive, supporting the child, similar considerations. Payments while the offender is in jail will obviously be postponed, but will accrue. Many of my audience know that I am a crusader against drunk driving. Folks, anything that we can do to deter drunk driving, I think is something that we should do. And hopefully this will continue to emphasize that the public's concern over drunk driving in this out of control situation. Texas has one of the worst drunk driving records in the United States, I learned in doing my research for this episode. We must not allow people to drink and drive. Folks, have a designated driver, take a taxi, take an Uber, hitch a ride, but do not get behind that wheel. And we have horrendous, sad cases almost every night on the evening news. Folks, we have got to get past this problem. We've got to get control. Please, yourself, be careful. Help your families to be careful and help the general public. And if you see a drunk driver, hit 911, get a policeman out there to arrest that person. Therefore, Saving America awards Governor Abbott and both parties in the Texas legislature for House Bill 393, requiring a drunk driver who kills a parent to pay child support. The U.S. Supreme Court upholds absolute immunity for presidents in Trump's case. Now, that may be a misleading headline. We'll explain further. This is perhaps the biggest ruling of SCOTUS this year, and perhaps one of the 3 or 4 biggest in the last decade. It's a 6-3 conservative liberal lineup in the decision. The current Department of Justice charged Trump for alleged interference with the results of the 2020 presidential election. Most Americans are familiar with the allegations that he attempted to get his VP not to certify the election, that he somehow caused the J6 riot, and that he contacted states regarding electors and et cetera, et cetera. Trump claimed total immunity since he was president at the time of the alleged actions. Another SCOTUS ruling has already determined that even if he was involved with J6, likely a federal obstruction charge would not stick. Here's a summary of the current ruling of the court. The big headline: under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive constitutional authority. Now, that is not a blanket deal. That's specific. And he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for all his official acts. The court added there is no immunity for unofficial acts. So the classification of the acts of the former president have to be undertaken in a case against Trump. Best estimates are this will delay such a case past the November election. The High Court also noted that production of documents, such as the famous Nixon tapes, does not impose on the president like a criminal prosecution, which involves their person. So documents not included in the ruling. Very important. The court specifically stated that the courts cannot inquire into the motives of the president in doing whatever is alleged. That would interfere with the separation of powers in the federal system, per the court. Regarding the specific discussions between Trump and VP Pence certifying the election, the court states that those communications are likely privileged under the doctrine they just espoused. Trump also argued impeachment was the only possible remedy, but the court noted this would only apply to a sitting president. The badge of dishonor today belongs to Bernie the Fraud Sanders, the senator from Vermont. I say fraud since he claims to be a socialist, but is worth about $3 million. Last I heard, he has 3 houses. Here's an exchange we're going to read. We try not to do too many quotes. Reminded by the Times reporter that he is now someone of considerable means, Sanders retorted, "I wrote a best-selling book. If you write a best-selling book, you can be a millionaire too." Folks, Bernie may have missed that in his promotion material. That's capitalism, you idiot. Yes, folks. So what have you got here? As I explained before, the only successful economic system in the history of the world is capitalism. Bernie, a typical socialist advocate, wants everybody else to live in poverty while he lives the good life on a government pension and books that only sold because he was in office on the public payroll. As I explained before, the only successful economic system in the history of the world is capitalism. Bernie, a typical socialist advocate, wants everybody else to live in poverty while he lives the good life on a government pension and books that only sold because he was in office on the public payroll. Bernie has supported communist governments around the world, many of which have subsequently failed. I couldn't find the information on it, but I believe he and his wife allegedly honeymooned in Moscow prior to the end of the USSR. Yeah, not someone I would put on my favorite American list. So Is he a socialist, which is oftentimes compared to some of the Northern European countries? Or is he just another dirty commie, which is the term that I grew up with during the Cold War, and I believe still applies to people who think communism is a good idea. So Bernie gets his F-grade award, this time for pushing to investigate war crimes against Israel for defending itself against the monstrous assault at actions against civilians by Hamas and its Palestinian supporters. I make no apologies for supporting Israel defending its citizens and its clear historical right to control its very limited tract of land. It is sad that the Middle East at this point is really beginning to accept Israel, and we've got the Abraham Accords, which have been very successful, and yet we've got clowns like Bernie causing problems. We've got these protests that are completely out of line. And by the way, Bernie is not only our F-grade recipient for being the fake socialist that he is, but he also is honored in a funny sort of way. In my book, Bad Deal for America, he does get a face card, and he is deserving of being in Bad Deal for America and his F grade. A Santa Fe, New Mexico judge just dismissed Alec Baldwin's involuntary manslaughter case with prejudice. That means the case is over. It cannot be refiled. The reason is as fascinating as this case is tragic. In October 2021, Alec Baldwin was producing and starring in a new Western movie to be called Rust. While a scene was being rehearsed, Baldwin discharged a handgun, and instead of a blank, a live round was discharged. It hit and killed cinematographer Hala Hutchins and wounded the film's director. As a result, the film's armorer, the person who takes care of the arms that are used in film productions, Hannah Gutierrez, and Baldwin, as the producer of the film, in addition to having discharged the weapon, were charged in the killing. Baldwin has also been dealing with civil suits related to the injuries caused by the shooting. Earlier criminal charges against Baldwin had been dropped. Ms. Gutierrez was prosecuted and found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. She was sentenced to 18 months in jail. Also charged in the case was Assistant Director Dave Halls, who said on the movie set the handgun had no live ammunition in it. He pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor charge of negligent use of a deadly weapon. Interestingly, he was given a 6-month unsupervised probation order. However, the Santa Fe prosecutor presented the case against Baldwin to a grand jury in January of this year. He was able to get an indictment. This time, the case went to trial. In a surprise announcement, the judge dismissed the case 3 days after the trial started this July. The reason is very unusual. According to the ruling of the judge, the prosecution withheld evidence from the defense. Under American jurisprudence, and contrary to television crime shows, any possibly relevant evidence must be provided to the defense attorneys by the state in advance of the trial. Part of the evidence in this case concerned why there were even live rounds on a movie set. Best I can tell, during off hours, some of the cast and crew fired live rounds for fun. It was the responsibility of the armorer, Miss Gutierrez, to make sure any gun on the set was only armed with blanks. It has never been resolved how a gun with a live round could have been handed to Baldwin during the filming. Leading up to the dismissal of the case, it was alleged by the defense team for Baldwin that not all of the live rounds recovered from the set by law enforcement had been disclosed by the prosecutors to the defense. The court held that this prejudiced the defense and that the withholding of the additional live rounds was deliberate by the prosecution. Now, Ms. Gutierrez, who's already been convicted, may use the same argument to appeal her conviction. Now, Baldwin still may face civil claims, but he's likely past any further criminal charges. Who was born and raised in New York by his Jewish father and German mother. After West Point, he served his country both in the Army and the FBI, where he worked in the National Security Branch assigned to foreign counterintelligence. convinced of an impending collapse of American society due to the increasing negative influence and corrupt collusion of globalist U.S. corporations and globalist U.S. government, David left America in 2010 and moved to China, where he has worked in risk management, advising clients on strategic threat intelligence, as well as conducting security operations, corporate investigations, and due diligence. He has also worked for both Amazon and Boeing, leading their corporate crisis management departments, overseeing all of Asia. He is the founder and CEO of Terenbith Leadership Advisory. Rather incredible, this man has been declared an enemy of the state and is no longer welcome back in the United States. His political ideology centers upon faith, family, and freedom. He is fluent in Mandarin, Chinese, and German. His motto is "Lead to Victory." He is the author of the current book, Patriots Betrayed, a soldier, scholar, and spy's warning about America. And so we welcome author Baumblatt for his first appearance on Saving America. Welcome.
Thanks, David. I appreciate the welcome, and hello to all your listeners.
Yes, and boy, you've got, that's, I think, maybe the longest introduction that we've put into the record so far.
Thank you. Thank you.
Put a lot into it. As you know, what we do is we ask 3 questions to give people a chance to give a quick view of what they're involved in. And again, I know what you're involved in is much more complex, but here's question number 1. Tell us why you are not welcome back in the USA with regard to the FBI investigation against you.
Sure. Thank you. So first, I do not know why I'm not welcome back, but I could tell you why, the experiences that I go through. When I go to America, I am detained, searched, interrogated, deceived, humiliated, and physically assaulted by my own government. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go through it really quick. The last time I traveled back to America was August of 2019. It was a plane from Taiwan to Chicago International O'Hare Airport. As soon as I arrived in O'Hare, I was selected for secondary screening. I began to undergo interrogation by what's called Customs and Border Patrol. They wanted to know all about what am I doing in China, what are my contacts. I tried to record the presence with my personal mobile phone. They told me I'm not allowed to do it. I had to surrender all my digital equipment to the Customs Border Patrol, give them my password to unlock the devices. My devices then went into a back room that I was not allowed to accompany them. Then they proceeded to continue to interrogate me, go through all my baggage, piece by piece. I waited over 3 hours until I finally got my digital equipment back. I left the airport thinking that was going to be it. It's not. Once I was in Chicago, and to all my viewers, my reason I was in Chicago is I was about to do a deposition against the Boeing company that I was suing them. I'm on Rumble channel, episode number 2, me and Boeing, check it out. You'll understand what I'm talking about, the collapse of America. But the purpose of the trip to Chicago was to do a deposition against the Boeing company. While I was in Chicago, within about 24 hours, I realized I was under surveillance. Not overt surveillance, but covert surveillance. I could just feel it. I ended up going to what's called Grant Park, which is in the city of Chicago. At that time, I saw an individual that was surveilling me, which is a polite word to say he was stalking me, taking pictures of me, all covertly. I described this to the audience. Everything that I'm saying here has been submitted to the congressmen and senators. This is all documented. Once I realized I was under surveillance, I ran away from that vicinity about 200 meters inside the park into a dead end. I turned around. The same man is in a full pursuit running after me. Again, I go into the details and more. I won't go in too much now because we're under time. The man ended up, there was a physical altercation where the man physically assaulted me. At that time, I had no doubts in my mind this person was an FBI employee, either an FBI special agent or in the FBI, what we have is surveillance operatives. He was one or the other. And I knew at that time, if I would have physically assaulted this person, I would have been in a lot of trouble. I ended up becoming physically assaulted by this person. I ended up running again away from this person, escaping the maneuver. I never imagined I would be doing this in my own country. Again, to the audience, this is why I'm not welcome. To make a long story short, When it was time for me to leave America, same airport, Chicago O'Hare, I check in, I go through customs, I'm ready to board the plane just like all the other passengers are. As we're lined up to literally board the plane, two customs and border agents in full uniform are inspecting all the passports of the people boarding. They see my passport. They tell me to step out of line about 2 to 3 feet. This is the humiliation. All the passengers are seeing what's going on. They end up saying they need to go through all my stuff. I said, where should I put my stuff? They said, just sit on the floor. I'm sitting on the floor, taking off my shoes. They want to go through the soles of my feet, all my baggage, everything, taking pictures of all the telephone numbers or whatnot, all in plain sight of all the passengers. It got so bad that the stewardess who's waiting at the open door of the airplane is motioning to him that, is he going to be arrested? Otherwise, this plane has got to go. The plane's ready to go. They're still searching me. Finally, again, interrogation. To make a long story short, I'm finally allowed to leave. Immediately, the stewardess escorts me to my seat, and we're gone. I'm detained, searched, interrogated, deceived, humiliated, physically assaulted. If that's not welcome, I don't know what it is. I get treated better in foreign countries than my own country. And to all the audience, all our senators and congressmen know about this story, and they've all ignored me. I'd like answers, and I'm sure the American public would like answers.
Well, maybe this interview today, which may be played to a different audience, maybe that'll trigger some of that. Let me ask you question number 2. Describe what you're seeing with regard to the decline of America and its symptoms and causes.
Absolutely. I knew in 2005, America is headed to civil war and collapse. In 2010, I left America. Actions speak louder than words. When you physically leave the country, you know it, you believe it. If I could say one thing to show people what is the litmus test to show why we're declining, I come from a military family that goes all the way back to the Civil War. I have all family members, World War I, World War II. I'm a West Point grad. I grew up with father figures who served in the Vietnam. And if we all remember, in Vietnam, there was something called the draft. So to answer that question very specifically, I want my viewers to answer this question or think about in their mind. If there was a war now in America and we had to do the draft, do you think Americans would raise their hand and volunteer? Me as a military veteran, I would not even consider it enlisting in the military now. And to any of the young Americans, when I was a young boy, if you dodged the draft during Vietnam, I called you a coward. Now, if a draft came and a young American said, hell no, I'm not going to go, I'd say that person's a smart person and his morality's fine. Because when the government has no loyalty to the citizens have no loyalty to the government. So I would just pose that question to the American citizens when they think how strong our country are we, what is the decline? You ask yourselves, if we had a war and we needed to do the draft compared to Vietnam, World War I, World War II, Korea, what did you think is going to happen to the Americans now? Would they raise their hand and say, I will die for this country? Or would they say, hell no, screw you? I think we are going to be in a world of hurt in America.
Wow, something else. Question number 3, what can the average American do about the circumstances you're observing? What is the action plan?
Sure. So I left America, and I'm not, even though it is rising, if you do the studies, you're seeing more and more Americans leave America. I'm not advocating that. But what I will say is strength is in numbers. I would say find yourself with like-minded people. We've all heard this. Christian flight, white flight, conservative flight, whatever you want to call it. People are leaving blue states. They're going to red states. I would say surround yourself with like-minded people. We all know it. When I was young growing up, if you were a Democrat, I was a Republican, we were in a bar restaurant, we'd argue a little bit, and that's it. We've never seen the amount of political tensions that were going on now. We are going to civil war. I would say number 1 is start reevaluating who is your groups, who are the teams, who is your family, who are the associations that you're belonging to. Start finding like-minded people, even if that means you leave your state or your city and go to another place. I'm not saying you're going to have to leave the country, but I'm saying if it's going to get to civil war or collapse, you want to be surrounded by like-minded people.
Well, I'll say this is a pretty tough situation. I can relate to it. I was actually subject to the draft during the Vietnam War, and I fell into an interesting category because I was in the lottery, and I got a very high lottery number. And actually, while in college, instead of having a 2S deferment, I had a 1Y classification, meant that I was 1A, except they hadn't done a physical on me. It was subject to being drafted. But when I got the notice from the draft board, I call up, my hands are shaking, and I said, what's going on here? I'm about to get drafted. And the lady on the other end of the line at the Philadelphia draft board said, hey, Mr. Schein, she said, your draft number is 232. You have zero chance of being drafted, because the lowest number was 75 that would be drafted out of Philadelphia. Part of the reason for that is because there were so many volunteers at that time out of a big city like Philadelphia. But it was a pretty interesting situation. And of course, I actually served all of my Y exposure, and then was subject to they told me, once you served all that out, you're only subject to draft if you're under 35 and we go to a world war. And of course, by 1975, Nixon had eliminated the draft. But as you know, I came from a military family myself. My dad did 28 and a half years in the Navy. And so I was military dependent during Vietnam. And it was very interesting to be on one of these far liberal WAC campuses as someone who came from a military family. So it's interesting, your observations. And of course, you reached a higher level by both being at West Point, which is a big deal in itself, and then serving in both the Army and the FBI. How can our audience get more information about you and your book?
Sure. Well, one thing I could tell the audience is, sorry about Freedoms in America. I've already been shadow banned on YouTube, so not there. So I would say the two social platforms are Twitter and Rumble. All you got to do is look up my name, David Baumblatt. You'll find me. And then my website, it's called terebinth.info. You could get the book there, audio, ebook. And then there's hard and soft cover books, Amazon and whatnot. But the website, Terebinth, and then Twitter and Rumble, just my name, and you'll find me.
A disease known as political correctness has swept through America. It has especially damaged education at all levels. The case of Christian McGee is a great example. He received a 3-day suspension for using the phrase illegal alien in asking his teacher a question at Central Davidson High School in Lexington, North Carolina. His family has helped him file a lawsuit in federal court accusing the school of violating his First Amendment rights. Christian's mother explained that this could have him viewed as a racist and might impede his chances for college. The school would not comment directly, but explained that this apparently involved their code of conduct. So the student handbook states, schools may place restrictions on a student's right to free speech when the speech is obscene, abusive, promoting illegal drug use, or is reasonably expected to cause a substantial disruption to the school day. And this is a quote according to the Carolina Journal. Now, how would using a correct term like illegal alien in any way violate the above code? That's beyond me, folks. But then again, I only have 4 earned academic degrees. What would I know relative to the geniuses running this high school? It is even more interesting in that this case is in North Carolina. I would be less surprised if it was in communist-occupied California or New York. Therefore, Saving America awards Christian McGee and his family a coveted Saving America A grade. Former Marine prosecuted in New York City for defending subway passengers from a crazed person with a long criminal record. I cannot make up this sad headline, but after all, it is New York City, once the star of America, now site of gangs running through famed Times Square. So you have Jordan Neely, who has previously committed violence in the subway system and has been arrested 40 times, causing mayhem in a subway car in May 2023. Penny encounters Neely on a New York City subway. Neely was acting erratically and threatening passengers. Witnesses have testified that Neely said someone is going to die today. So Penny and two others restrained Neely until he settled down, maybe a little too settled, as the claim is that he died from compression to his neck. Prosecutors have charged Penny with a second-degree manslaughter, a criminally negligent homicide. One take on this sad situation is that Neely is black and Penny is white. Question if the skin colors were reversed, would this have even made the news at all? Is this equal justice? I believe in Texas we would have given Penny a medal. Humorous side note, Biden rejects Trump's, in my opinion, humorous offer to have a golf round at his golf course and to have a no holds barred, no moderator debate. I'm certainly not surprised that Joe turned him down. And frankly, this reminds me of the proposed fight, which has never taken place, between the clown prince Zuckerberg and the oddest billionaire anyone knows, Elon Musk. And I doubt, like I said, that'll ever take place. Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and